Get that animal out of this boarding area, right now. Sir, Cleo is my guide dog. She has to stay with me. I don't care, no animal. Anyone can order one of those vests online. This is a premium cabin, not a kennel. Move.
Now, 41 people standing in the priority check-in line at Charlotte Douglas International Airport heard him say it. They heard the flatness of it, the way a man speaks when he has already decided there is nothing to discuss. They saw him fold his arms across his chest immediately after, the gesture of a person who expects to be obeyed and has never once been surprised when they were. The man at the other end of that pointing finger did not move. He was black, 42 years old, wearing a navy wool sweater that had gone thin at both elbows and a pair of khaki pants that had been washed so many times the color had softened into something closer to cream. His left hand held a white folding cane, collapsed and clipped at his side. His right hand held the leather lead attached to a golden Labrador named Cleo, who was wearing a red service vest with black block lettering that read, "Surface Dog, Do Not Pet, On Duty." His name was Daniel Reeves, and he stood absolutely still, not frozen, not afraid, still the way a person is still when they have stood in rooms like this before and know that the first one to move loses something they will not get back. Cleo sat. Her ears came up. She did not look at Richard. She looked at the space 2 feet ahead of Daniel's left knee, the place where a hazard might appear, the place she had been trained to watch for 1,500 hours before she was ever cleared to leave the facility in Santa Rosa, California, where she had learned the shape of a human life she would spend the next decade protecting. "Sir," Daniel said. His voice did not climb. "This is a service animal." Richard's expression did not change. It was a particular kind of face. The face of a man who has been told things he disagreed with many times and has built up a tolerance to the experience of being wrong. 9 years managing boarding gates will do that to a person. 9 years of delays and angry passengers and airline policy binders thicker than most novels, and somewhere inside all of that, a man can start to believe that his opinion is the same thing as a rule. "I don't care what the vest says," Richard said. "Anyone can order one of those online for $14. This is a premium cabin boarding area. We have passengers with allergies. We have," "Sir," Daniel said again, the same register, the same steadiness. "I'd like you to ask me the 2 questions." Richard blinked. "What?" "The 2 questions. The only 2 questions federal law allows you to ask me." Somewhere behind Daniel, a woman in a cashmere coat shifted her rolling bag from her right hand to her left. A man in a gray suit tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they realize they are about to hear something they did not expect. Most of the other 41 people in the line did what 41 people usually do in an airport when something uncomfortable is happening 7 feet away from them. They looked at their phones. They studied the departures board. They found something very interesting to examine on the ceiling. Richard uncrossed his arms and walked back behind the counter. He said, without looking at his computer screen, "Sir, I'm going to need you to step to the side while I process the rest of these passengers." Daniel did not step to the side. He stood at the counter with his left hand resting flat on the surface, palm down, fingers spread, the way a man steadies himself on a table when he is making absolutely certain he does not tip over. Cleo adjusted her position by 4 inches, angling her body slightly in front of his left leg. She had done this so many times it was no longer a conscious act. It was just the geometry of how they moved through the world. "I have a flight to catch," Daniel said. "DL 1847 to Reagan National. Boarding in 41 minutes. I'd like to check in. And I'd like you to step aside." "I know." Daniel's voice was still at exactly the same pitch it had been when he first spoke. "I'd also like to explain something to the people standing behind me, if you don't mind, because I think it might be useful to them." Richard's jaw tightened. "This isn't a classroom." "No," Daniel agreed. "But this is a public accommodation covered under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which means there are rules about what you are and are not allowed to ask me. And I think the people in this line deserve to know what those rules are, because this could happen to any of them, or to someone they love." He turned, not all the way, just enough so that his voice carried back into the line. The man in the gray suit was named Kevin Marsh. He was a pharmaceutical sales manager from Greensboro, 38 years old, and he had been standing in that line for 11 minutes waiting to check in for the same flight. He was on his phone when Daniel started speaking, scrolling through a thread of work emails he had already read twice without really absorbing them. He stopped scrolling. Under the ADA, Daniel said, facing slightly toward the people behind him but speaking clearly enough that everyone in a 15-foot radius could hear without effort, a business open to the public, and that includes airports, airlines, hotels, restaurants, stores, and every other place you go in your daily life, is legally required to allow service animals to accompany people with disabilities anywhere that members of the public are allowed to go. A woman near the back of the line quietly opened her phone's voice memo app and pressed record. The law also says that staff may only ask 2 questions. 2. The first, is this a service animal required because of a disability? The second, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? He paused for one beat, the pause of someone who is choosing the next words carefully because they matter. That is it. Those are the only 2 questions allowed. A business cannot ask you for documentation, cannot ask for a certification card, cannot ask for proof of training or a letter from your doctor. The Department of Justice is very clear on this. Requiring any of that documentation is a direct violation of 28 CFR Part 36, Section 302C. Kevin Marsh had stopped pretending to look at his phone. He was watching Daniel directly now, the way you watch someone diffuse something. I'll answer both questions right now, Daniel said, and turned back toward the counter. Yes, Cleo is a service animal required because of my disability. I lost my sight completely at 24 years old, and Cleo has been trained to guide me through public spaces safely, alert me to obstacles and drop-offs, and signal medical emergencies. She completed 2,200 hours of certified training at Canine Companions for Independence in Santa Rosa, California. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. You've now received the only information the law entitles you to receive. There is no legal basis remaining for denying me access to this boarding area. The line was very quiet. The announcements overhead kept cycling. Gate B7, final boarding, flight to Denver. But nobody in that cluster of 41 people was listening to the announcements. Richard was gripping the edge of his counter. Not dramatically. The way a person grips a surface when they feel the ground shifting it. I'm going to call airport security, he said. That's your right, Daniel said. I'll wait here. What happened in the next 9 minutes is the part of this story that matters most. Not because of what Daniel did, but because of what Richard chose to do when he had the chance to stop digging. The security officer who responded to Richard's call was named Sandra Cole. She was 31 years old, 4 years on the job, and she walked from the security station at the end of Concourse B with the unhurried pace of someone who has responded to enough gate disputes to know that they are almost never actually about safety. She assessed the situation in the way security people assess things. Quickly, systematically, without committing her face to an expression before she had to. She saw a man with a folding cane. She saw a dog in a service vest. She saw 41 people watching from a check-in line. She saw Richard Holman behind the counter with his arms folded again. And she saw the particular quality of his posture, which was the posture of a man who had called for backup because he needed someone else to do what he was no longer confident he could do alone. "What's the issue?" Sandra said. Richard spoke first. He always did. This individual is refusing to comply with a staff directive to relocate his animal to the general boarding area. He's creating a disruption and, he asked me 2 questions, Daniel said, calm, not interrupting so much as completing. I answered them, both of them. He still refused to process my check-in. Sandra looked at Daniel for a moment, then at Cleo, then at the red vest with the black letters that said Surface Dog, Do Not Pet, On Duty. She unclipped the tablet from her belt. "Can I get your name, sir?" "Daniel Reeves." She typed, waited 4 seconds, read, typed something else, read again. Then she looked up at Richard Holman and something shifted in her expression. Not dramatically, not with any satisfaction in it, just the small recalibration of a person who has just found out what she's actually dealing with. "Mr. Holman," she said, "did you check the passenger file before you denied boarding access?" "I used my professional judgment. Did you check the file?" A pause. No. Sandra turned the tablet around so that Richard could see the screen. The file for Daniel Reeves, Flight DL847, Seat 2B, First Class. Booked 18 days ago. Disability accommodation confirmed. Service animal approved by the airline's Special Services Department at the time of booking. Flag, priority boarding, and at the very bottom of the file, in the notes field, a single line that would have taken Richard 3 seconds to read if he had looked before he pointed. Passenger is a scheduled federal witness. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, Hart Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C. Case reference, DOJ 2024-11382. Richard read it. He read it the way a person reads something they cannot make unread. The gate area had gone very quiet in the particular way that spaces go quiet when the thing that everyone could see coming has finally arrived. I still have the authority, Richard started, to make independent judgments about. Mr. Holman. Sandra's voice did not raise. It did not need to. The system had a disability accommodation approved on this booking for 18 days. You did not look at the system. You made a decision about this passenger based on a visual assessment, then called security to enforce that decision. I need you to understand what that looks like from where I'm standing. Kevin Marsh, in the line behind them, had opened a browser on his phone and typed ADA Service Dog Rules Airports. He was reading. The woman with the voice memo app was still recording. Here is what you need to understand about Richard Holman, because this story is not about a villain. It is about something more ordinary than a villain, and therefore more dangerous. Richard was not a cruel man in the way the word is usually used. He was not mean at home. He had 2 daughters he coached in soccer. He donated to his church's food pantry every November. He had worked at this airport for 9 years and had, in that time, helped dozens of passengers who genuinely needed help, finding wheelchairs, calling for medical assistance, tracking lost luggage at 2 in the morning. But Richard had also, over those same 9 years, developed a particular habit of mind, the habit of deciding, in the first 3 seconds of looking at a person, how much of his patience they deserved. It was not something he had ever examined or named. It was simply the calculus that ran quietly behind his eyes every time someone walked up to his counter. A woman in a Burberry trench coat got the full wattage of his customer service smile before she reached him. A man in a worn navy sweater holding a folding cane got the folded arms. He had done this thousands of times and nothing had ever pushed back. That was the mechanism, not cruelty, comfort. The long, smooth comfort of never having been wrong in a way that cost him anything. What Richard could not have known, what no one at Gate C-14 that evening could have known from looking, was that Daniel Reeves had spent the last 14 years building the legal architecture for exactly this moment. He was 24 when the retinal degeneration took his sight. It happened over 7 months, not all at once, which was in some ways worse. He had time to watch it go, to notice exactly which details disappeared first, to keep a mental record of what the world looked like before the lights finally went out. He was in his 2nd year of a PhD program in law at Georgetown when his central vision collapsed enough that he could no longer read a standard text page. He was 25 when he could no longer recognize faces. Most people, if you said that to them, would understand it as the end of a certain kind of life. Daniel understood it as a problem with a set of specific legal, logistical, and practical dimensions, each of which could be addressed one at a time. That was not bravado. That was the way his mind had always worked. He learned Braille in 14 months, which is faster than most sighted adults can manage because Daniel had always been, above everything else, a disciplined reader. He learned to use JAWS screen reading software with the proficiency of a programmer, navigating case law databases at speeds his sighted colleagues found genuinely unsettling. He finished his doctorate with a dissertation on the enforcement gaps in ADA Title III litigation, which was cited in 4 subsequent federal rulings. He was now the legal director of the National Disability Rights Network, the largest nonprofit legal advocacy organization for disabled Americans in the country. His organization had overseen 914 federal ADA complaints in the preceding fiscal year. They had prevailed in 841 of them. He traveled approximately 60 times a year. He had been through scenes like this one before, not always in airports, sometimes in hotels, sometimes in restaurants, sometimes in office buildings where he had been scheduled to give a deposition or a lecture, and someone in the lobby had decided, before asking a single question, that the combination of a folding cane, a dog, and a worn sweater added up to a person who did not belong there. He had never once raised his voice. He had learned, early and at considerable personal cost, that the moment you raise your voice in a situation like this, the story becomes about your anger and not about the law. And Daniel was not interested in his anger being the story. He was interested in the law being the story. Sandra Cole had been on her radio for 6 minutes. The message had gone up through 2 levels of duty management and landed, finally, in the office of Christine Okafor, the Director of Passenger Services for the Charlotte Douglas North Terminal, who was in her office on the 2nd floor, finishing a cold cup of coffee and reviewing incident reports from the afternoon shift. Christine was 53 years old and had worked in airport passenger services for 26 of them. She had seen most things. She put down the coffee, read the incident summary Sandra had radioed up, and went very still for a moment in the particular way of someone absorbing the full diameter of a problem. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her jacket, and walked to the elevator. She arrived at gate C14 at 7:17 p.m. She was carrying nothing. She did not need anything. She looked at the situation for 11 seconds, the line, the passengers, the phones that were out, Sandra Cole standing off to the side with the careful neutrality of a witness, Daniel Reeves standing at the counter with his hand flat on the surface and Cleo at his side, and Richard Holman behind the counter with the particular stillness of a man who has run out of moves and has not yet admitted it to himself. They walked to Richard's side of the counter and opened his terminal herself. She read the passenger file. She read the DOJ case reference. She read the accommodation flag that had been sitting in the system, unanswered and unread, for 18 days. When she looked up, she looked at Richard first. The accommodation was approved and documented at the time of booking, she said. Her voice was low enough that the passengers in the line would not catch every word, but not so low as to be secret. There are things that should be said in front of witnesses. The system had a priority flag. You didn't look. Richard opened his mouth. Don't, Christine said, not unkindly, just firmly, in the way you stop someone from saying something that will make their situation worse rather than better. She had said that word to employees in that tone more times than she could count. Sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't. The ones who didn't were always the ones who ended up in the detailed incident reports. She closed the terminal, picked up the boarding pass that had been sitting, unscanned, on the counter for 24 minutes, walked around to Daniel's side of the counter and placed it in his hand, not sliding it across the surface, but handing it to him directly, which is the appropriate thing to do when you are giving something to someone who cannot see the counter. Mr. Reeves, she said, I'm Christine Okafor, Director of Passenger Services. I want to apologize for this delay. Your accommodation was fully approved and should have been honored immediately. We're going to get you to your gate right now. I'm going to walk with you personally. Daniel took the boarding pass, folded it once and tucked it into his breast pocket. Thank you, he said. He did not say anything else to Richard. He had nothing left to say to Richard. He had said everything useful 40 minutes ago, and Richard had not been listening, and the law had done what it was built to do. He turned from the counter. And then, for the second time that evening, he stopped and turned slightly toward the line. I want to say one more thing, he said, and the gate area went quiet again. If you are ever in a situation like this one, if someone ever refuses to accommodate a service animal, yours or someone you're with, here is what you need to know. ADA complaints against businesses and public accommodations can be filed directly with the Department of Justice. The number is 1-800-514-0301. There is no filing fee. The deadline is 180 days from the incident. You do not need a lawyer. You fill out a form at ADA.gov. That's it. He let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. You do not need to know the right person. You do not need to be powerful. You only need to know your rights. Write those numbers down. Kevin Marsh, standing in line, was already typing them into his phone. The woman with the voice memo app said quietly to the person next to her, I got all of that. Christine Okafor walked with Daniel and Cleo to the gate. Not quickly. At the pace Daniel set, which was steady and unhurried, the white cane unfolded now, and sweeping a clean arc in front of him. Cleo walking at his left side with the focused calm of something that has never in its life been anything other than exactly what it was supposed to be. At the jet bridge door, Christine paused. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. You knew the file had the accommodation flag. You knew the system had everything in it. Why didn't you just tell him to check the computer at the beginning?" Daniel considered this. He took his time with it, the way he took his time with most things that deserved a real answer instead of a fast one. "Because the computer wasn't the point," he said. "The law doesn't require him to find me in the system before he treats me with dignity. The law requires him to treat me with dignity regardless of what the system says. The system is a backup. The law is the foundation." He paused for one beat. "If I'd said check your computer, he would have checked the computer, found the flag, let me through, and learned nothing. Tomorrow he would have done the same thing to someone who wasn't in the system, someone who booked last minute, someone whose paperwork wasn't perfect, someone who didn't know the two questions." He stepped through the jet bridge door. Cleo stepped with him. "I wasn't trying to get through the gate," Daniel said, without turning back. "I was trying to make sure the next person gets through the gate, too." The door closed behind him. Christine Okafor went back to the gate counter. Sandra Cole was still there, finalizing her incident report. Richard Holman was still there too, though he had moved from behind the counter and was now standing to the side of it, which was a different kind of position, the position of a person who has lost the geography of a situation. Christine handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a printed incident summary with her signature at the bottom and a box checked in the upper right corner. "Suspended pending investigation. You'll receive a formal notice by email within the hour," she said. "HR will contact you tomorrow morning about the process." She paused. "Richard, I've worked with you for 6 years. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you made a judgment call based on what a person looked like, and I think you made it before you looked at a single piece of information available to you. And then when you could have stopped, you didn't." Richard looked at the paper. He did not say anything. "The investigation will be thorough," Christine said. "There are 3 prior complaints in your file that were documented but not escalated. This will be reviewed alongside those." She said it the way you say something that needs to be said even when there is no good time to say it. She walked back toward the elevator. Sandra Cole finished her report, saved it, clipped the tablet back to her belt, and walked back toward the security station without looking at Richard. Richard stood at the side of the counter for a long time. The line had moved on. The flight to Reagan National had boarded and closed. The gate had cycled over to the next departure, a flight to Minneapolis. A new crowd pulling new bags through the new queue, and nobody in the new crowd knew what had happened here 40 minutes ago, and nobody would unless they looked it up. The video Kevin Marsh had taken, not the whole thing, just about 6 minutes of it, Daniel speaking clearly and calmly to the line of passengers while Richard stood behind the counter, was uploaded to his personal account at 8:04 p.m. By midnight, it had been viewed 240,000 times. By the following morning, that number had become 4.7 million. By then, Daniel Reeves was already in the hearing room. The Senate Judiciary Committee convened at 9:02 a.m. in room 216 of the Hart Senate Office Building. It was a high-ceilinged, wood-paneled room that smelled of carpet cleaner and old ambition, the particular smell of Washington rooms where decisions get made that most people find out about weeks later through an article they share without reading all the way to the end. Daniel sat at the witness table. Cleo was under the table, her chin resting on the top of his left shoe, which she did in enclosed spaces because she had learned early that it helped him feel exactly where she was without needing to look. On the table in front of him was a stack of documents in Braille. He did not need to consult them. He had written every word of his testimony himself, and he carried it the way people carry things they have built from the ground up, not in front of him, but inside him, in the place where something lives when you have thought about it for long enough. The committee chair called the session to order, called Daniel's name, asked him to proceed. Daniel placed both hands flat on the table. The same gesture he had made at gate C14 the night before. The same flatness, the same steadiness. "Good morning," he said. "Last night, on my way to this room, I was denied access to a commercial airline boarding area because of my service animal. I was told to remove the dog and wait elsewhere. I was not asked the 2 questions the law requires. I was not checked against the airline's own accommodation system, which contained a full record of my approved request. I was assessed from a distance by a person who made a decision about me before a single piece of information was consulted. The room was quiet in the way of a room full of people who have staffers sitting behind them and are calculating, in real time, what something means. I want to be very clear," Daniel continued, "that this story does not have a good ending simply because I knew the law, that I knew the law is not a defense, that I prevailed is not justice. Justice would be a world in which someone's rights are protected by the systems they encounter, not by their personal knowledge of the mechanisms available to contest those systems. The woman with a service dog who doesn't know Section 302C should have the same protection I received last night. The veteran with a PTSD service animal who can't cite the CFR shouldn't lose that protection because he lacks my background." He turned his head slightly, as though looking at the panel, though he was not looking at anything they could see. "The legislation you are considering today would close specific enforcement gaps in ADA Title III compliance for transportation facilities. I want to walk you through exactly which gaps matter most and exactly what closing them would change for the 61 million Americans with disabilities who use public accommodations every single day." He spoke for 38 minutes without notes. There is a particular kind of strength that is so quiet it gets mistaken for something else. For weakness, sometimes, for passivity, for an absence of fight. Daniel Reeves did not raise his voice at gate C14. He did not call anyone. He did not film anything. He did not threaten. He did not perform his anger or his humiliation for an audience that might respond to it. He stood still. He spoke clearly. He turned to a group of strangers and gave them, free of charge, in the middle of an airport, information that could protect them or someone they loved. That is not the absence of fight. That is fight in its most precise form, aimed not at the person who wronged you, but at the system that allowed the wrong to happen, and the ignorance that made the system possible. Richard Holman did not lose his job because Daniel Reeves was powerful. He lost it because he made a series of choices, in the ordering of those choices, in the refusal to stop at any point when stopping was still possible. That left a documented record of a man who had decided, before looking at a single fact, what a person in a worn sweater with a folding cane was worth. The record was the evidence. Daniel didn't have to create it. Richard built it himself, word by word, minute by minute, in front of 41 witnesses. If you are watching this and you have a service animal, or you are the family member of someone who does, write these things down. The law is ADA Title III. The regulation is 28 CFR Part 36, Section 302C. Staff may only ask 2 questions. Is this a service animal required because of a disability? And what task has it been trained to perform? No documentation is required. No vest is required. No certification card. If you are denied access after answering those 2 questions, you can file a complaint with the Department of Justice at ADA.gov or by calling 1-800-510-301. There is no cost. The deadline is 180 days. You do not need a lawyer. You only need to know what Daniel knew when he walked up to that counter. You only need to know that the law exists, what it says, and
how to use it.
Because the law does not work on its own. It works when the people it was built for know how to pick it up. Know your rights. They are the thing no one can take away at a gate counter at 6:53 in the evening, in front of 41 people who may or may not be paying attention. Some of them will be.